Guess it's the policy of the store at the time, isn't it? And whether she was doing it against policy, because some employers are more than happy for staff to help themselves to their daily lunch.
Yes.
And others, especially those multinational chains, they have quite strict processes, I'm sure, and policies around it. So, yes, it's...
Susan Baldacci told us today that, like New Zealand used to be in the States, you go to a deli and they offer you a sample. They say, here, have a slice of ham. And if she was doing that all day, you might think that would mitigate the severity of the offence, wouldn't you?
Well, you would, and it also depends. Are we talking about a great big piece of gorgeous sliced ham off the bone, or are we talking about one of those nasty scrapes of reconstituted ham that goes for in some deli sections, in which case she's welcome to it, in my view. The other way of looking at it is that if she is well-fed and of sunny disposition and a great employee, then she may well have encouraged her customers to purchase much more than $12,000 worth of deli food over time. And if anything, she could say, you really should buy this, because I've had 3 slices a day for the last 10 or 12 years. And look at me, I'm in blooming good health.
I think the defence may call you up.
An expert witness.
To go with that, a meat tax is being suggested as a way for New Zealand to save water. There's a study in Nature Sustainability demonstrating that vegetarian or pescatarian diets can reduce a country's water footprint by up to a half. Mike, would you be willing to make the supreme sacrifice here?
I think that we should be able to eat meat because New Zealand is a meat producer, and I would prefer that we export less and look after our own people first in terms of meat. So if there was going to be a decrease in meat production, I'd rather see that at the expense of export markets myself.
Okay. Last topic, a McDonald's employee in Hamilton, Janine Reutauaki, says she was told by management not to speak te reo because of complaints from customers and staff.
I pupua ki te riri i roto i au, i te mama, koina te wātuatahi ko ki mai te tahi kaue kōrero Māori.
Janine, talking to Māori television, I grew angry then sad. This is the first time I've been told I can't speak Māori. This is Māori Language Week. But to us students, speaking Māori is normal. I speak Māori all the time. McDonald's denies there were customer complaints. It cites diversity in its workforce. It says English is used as a common language amongst staff to ensure clear communication and provide an inclusive environment. But staff can talk with customers in other languages. So, what do you think? Nothing to see here, move along, or does McDonald's need to accommodate te reo in internal communications? Mike, what do you think?
I think there's an uncomfortable relationship with McDonald's and Polynesians, Māoris in general. I mean, you look at some of the marketing material that comes out from McDonald's, and it's, I guess the whole brand of a hamburger franchise is that it's about 50s America, you know, especially internationally. I think it's probably changed more internally in the US around what McDonald's is and what the experience is. But one day I must admit, I thought about this before, where I looked in a McDonald's restaurant. I looked at some of the beautiful pictures of golden-haired sports people that McDonald's sponsored. I looked at the staff, which were predominantly South Asian and Pākehā New Zealanders, and I looked at the clients and predominantly Māori Polynesians. Yeah. So there's a lot of work there to do for McDonald's, and I think it's poor, and I hope that lady gets the chance to speak a beautiful language.
All right. Mike Ray, who's been on the panel. Sorry, Michael, didn't allow you much time to comment on the last two.
I agree with him anyway.
Michael Moynihan, thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. Really nice.
And Mike Rehu, and thanks, Mike. And we are back tomorrow with the panel. Thank you for your company. And Checkpoint is on the way.
Tōtu maira e hoa mā he kōrero kei te haere hei kaupapa, kei te karawhiua. Welcome to Checkpoint. Tonight the exodus begins. More than 1 million people evacuate America's eastern coastline as that hurricane gets closer. The ugly side of Auckland Council's resource consent botch up. What happens when your neighbour's renovation blocks out your view of more than 80 years? Dunedin parents on edge after reports of 4 suspicious approaches to primary school children during the past week. How long does it take to get a payout from MPI if your stock has been infected with M. bovis? Unions fear Labour may cave to pressure from New Zealand First. The White Ferns have a new captain. We speak to her and she's stoked. And a McDonald's worker left angry and upset after being told she couldn't speak Māori at work.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Bat and aho. The Environment Minister David Parker has had a run-in with 1080 protesters at Parliament after they threw fake 1080 pellets over the forecourt steps. Protesters turned up with placards and loudspeakers outside Parliament at the weekend. They've since drawn over Parliament's entryways in chalk and have now scattered fake poison pellets and dead mice and birds. Mr Parker went out to see what was happening and wasn't impressed.
I think people should comply with the law. We've had to have people out here in protective gear because they weren't sure whether it was fake or not.
The Environment Minister David Parker. The protesters hounded Mr Parker for answers, but after engaging for a short time, he left the forecourt. New Zealand's High Commissioner in Australia has criticised its deportation policy, calling it corrosive to the Trans-Tasman relationship. Chris Seed made the case to Australian MPs on their Joint Standing Committee on Migration today. He says Australian policy changes in 2001 and 2014 left Kiwis significantly more vulnerable to deportation than any other nationality.
Many of those consequences don't look like good public policy outcomes to us, and they're having a corrosive impact on the otherwise strong relationship between New Zealand and Australia.
Chris Seed says New Zealanders in Australia are treated much differently than Australians here. AA says if motorists don't start seeing the benefits of a fuel tax, they'll become increasingly frustrated with the extra cost. Aucklanders have forked out $13.2 million in the first month of the new regional fuel tax. The 11.5 cents a litre tax was added to fuel prices at the start of July to fund transport projects. The Automobile Association spokesman, Barney Irvine, says it's now up to the council and the government to ensure that motorists start seeing the benefits of the extra cost.
All of this is asking a lot of motorists. I mean, not only are they looking at a regional fuel tax, they're also looking at a hike in the national fuel tax of 4 cents a litre from next month. And on top of that, we're seeing record high fuel prices. So the onus is really on the council and the government to deliver benefit.
The AA's Barney Irvine. Dunedin's mayor says a series of suspicious approaches to school children is concerning, but Dunedin is still a safe city. There are reports of at least 4 children being startled or confronted while walking to or from school in the past week. On one occasion, a man attempted to lure a primary school-age girl into his vehicle by saying he wanted to help looking for a lost puppy. But the Mayor, Dave Cull, says the city is usually safe.
It obviously is of concern, but it's not representative of the city as a whole. We know that Dunedin is perceived as overwhelmingly a very safe environment for kids.
Dave Cull says he hopes police find those responsible for the approaches and that they're dealt with appropriately. A hot air balloon pilot says showing people how to turn off the gas in a balloon is a potentially lethal move. The New Zealand Civil Aviation Authority is recommending that passengers preparing for balloon rides be briefed on how to shut off the gas. European aviation safety officials say passengers are more likely to survive after a fire starts if there's an easy and quick way to shut off the main gas outlet. But a New Zealand pilot, Dennis Hall, says instructing passengers how to turn off the gas is like showing them how to turn off the engine of an aircraft.
The idea of actually briefing them and giving them a sense of having some control, I think it would be a mistake because people can conceal a tank behind them and could be turning the taps off without you knowing. And that could be really dangerous.
A hot air balloon pilot, Dennis Hall. The Justice Minister is not ruling out having to deal with more compensation claims like that of convicted murderer John Vogel. Vogel will be paid $10,000 after being confined to a cell for 21 days in 2000, 6 days longer than legally allowed. Andrew Little says the government will pay the compensation and will cover part of Vogel's legal costs.
I couldn't rule out that there have been other incidents historically where people have been detained, whether in solitary confinement or otherwise, for a longer period than they should have been. That might lead to a claim. I'm not aware of any specific claims at this point, though.
The Justice Minister, Andrew Little. McDonald's will change its language policy after a worker was told she couldn't speak te reo Māori during work hours. Janine Eru-Taueki says her shift manager at McDonald's Te Rapa told her to stop using te reo after receiving complaints from customers and staff. However, a McDonald's New Zealand spokesperson, Simon Kenny, says their policy should actually reflect the official languages of New Zealand, so English, Māori or sign language can be used when staff are working. It is 5:05. Sport. Being captain of the White Ferns has become too much for Susie Bates, prompting her to step down. The 30-year-old Bates has captained the national women's cricket side for the past 6 years and says she no longer believes she's the best person for the job. She's handing over the reins to Amy Satterthwaite.
The last 12 months I've struggled with dealing with the captaincy and playing, and perhaps the performances as a group haven't gone as well as I would have liked, but now that decision's been made, I think it makes sense for my own game to be able to concentrate on that at the end of my career and put as much into performing as well as I can without the captaincy.
Former captain Susie Bates. The White Ferns' next assignment is a 3-match T20 series against Australia later this month, followed by the T20 World Cup in the Caribbean in November. The Silver Ferns defender Temalisi Whakahokotau has suffered a serious knee injury and won't play for the rest of the year. Whakahokotau ruptured ligaments in her right knee while training for Saturday's test against England in Auckland. Michaela Sokolich-Beatson has been brought in as defensive cover. Tennis umpires are reportedly considering a boycott of Serena Williams' matches until she apologises to their colleague Carlos Ramos. The 23-time Grand Slam champion called chair umpire Ramos a thief and a liar and also accused him of sexism during her loss in the weekend's US Open women's final. The Times reports that umpires are unhappy with the way the Portuguese official has been treated and believe he has been thrown to the wolves for doing his job. That's the news.
Tonight on Night, Simon Morris reviews a couple of flicks he wasn't initially keen on, McCallan and McQueen, while Penny Hunt talks about Milk, her movie project about the possibly true story of the German U-boat crew that sneaked on land to steal a bit of fresh Kiwi dairy produce.
So we have a different flavour coming for this summer in New Zealand.
What flavour is it going to be?
Oh, well, it's a mixture of chocolate, vanilla, strawberry, all the ice cream flavours you can imagine.
Sounds great.
But every El Nino is different.
That's Lately with Karen Hay on RNZ National.
Met service weather through to midnight tomorrow, Northland to North Taranaki, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country. Fine today, cloudy periods developing south of Northland tomorrow morning. Gisborne to Wairarapa, fine apart from some high cloud tomorrow. South Taranaki to Wellington, cloudy periods. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, fine today, high cloud tomorrow. Buller becoming cloudy this evening and drizzle developing tomorrow afternoon. Westland and Fiordland, cloud increasing, drizzle developing south of the glaciers this evening, turning to rain in Fiordland tonight, then spreading to Westland tomorrow with heavy falls possible. Rain easing to isolated showers south of the glaciers by tomorrow evening. Otago and Southland, mainly fine, brief rain tomorrow morning, and the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods with the odd shower tomorrow morning. It's 5:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina Batten. Thank you everyone for being with us. We head to the Atlantic coast of the US shortly, and later we head to Te Rapa, where McDonald's said kahore, no, to the use of Māori on the work floor. Plus, how long does it take for M. bovis compensation to arrive? Well, in some cases, it's months. All of that coming up, but we're going to begin with the impacts of that big consenting blunder by Auckland Council. As we reported late last month, the council over a year issued more than 400 resource consents it potentially shouldn't have. Building has started at up to 137 of those homes and could start at the other 293 at any time. Our reporting until now has focused on the impact to the consent holders. They've been told to reapply, and when they do, their consents might change or even be rejected. But there's also the neighbours of these people. Their homes could be losing value because next door they've been allowed to build higher and wider and bigger than they should have been. The situation is entirely the fault of Auckland Council, and yet the council is telling homeowners it's up to them to legally challenge the potentially unlawful consents. No fault of their own, but they're left with the challenge. In a moment we'll hear from the lawyer who brought this bungle to the attention of Auckland Council, but first here's Zach Fleming and our cameraman Nick Monroe with a case study.
Soon, when Gary Pont makes his morning coffee, he'll probably be staring into someone else's bedroom.
It's a shock to the system, more or less, I would say.
A property developer's building a 2-storey backyard extension to the house next door. Gary, who's 82 and has lived on Beaconsfield Street in Grey Lynn for his entire life, says he would have liked at the very least a courteous heads up. But he only found out
when they started digging out the backyard and that, and it was the way that he went about it. He's never approached us or anything. He's just put the show up and that's it, you know.
He is Alistair Raw of Raw Landscape and Build Limited. And there's a possibility that the only reason he's been allowed to build this is because Auckland Council stuffed up and issued him with resource consent when it shouldn't have. The council botched up to 430 resource consents in 2017 because of an incorrect interpretation of the law. Gary is one of the human faces of that stuff up.
I don't think we'll see daylight somehow with the way that they've gone up.
And Auckland Council has essentially washed its hands of its mistake. It's acknowledged up to 430 resource consents might have been wrongly issued, but told homeowners like Gary that it's up to them to sort it out. Gary's only option is to seek a High Court review.
Oh, if I'd have had the finance, I think I would have been along to Metro Law to see what had happened there.
But Gary, who's currently battling melanoma, doesn't have the finance, and without the money for a High Court battle, he is powerless. There is literally nothing he can do to sort out whether his neighbour's two-storey extension should be allowed. Auckland Council has recommended that Alistair Raw and the other 429 people potentially issued with incorrect consents apply for new ones. And it has recommended that they stop building until those new consents come through. But Alistair Raw hasn't acted on either of those recommendations. He is continuing to build and hasn't applied for a new consent. Mr. Raw declined to be interviewed, but he told me that I would be hearing from his lawyer. I am yet to hear from his lawyer. Gary's parents moved in here in 1947 from up the road. So for Gary, that's 71 years in this house and 82 years on this street.
Yeah, seen a lot of changes in that time.
He remembers his neighbours from back in 47.
There was Mr. and Mrs. Tilton in there from Tilton and Opie's the Undertakers, and Mr. and Mrs. Cronin. Mr. Cronin was on the Auckland City Council, and the chemists along in Great North Road. And
basically, Gary's from an era when you didn't have to lock your door and it was weird if you didn't know your neighbours. But he's not anti-change. He doesn't think things have gotten worse. He just recognises that they're different. When I asked Gary what he thought of his neighbourhood's transformation, gentrification, he simply said it was inevitable. Suggest he's a NIMBY, and Gary winces.
I'd be approachable with the way, you know, if he'd have gone the right way about it, but no, I don't think I'd hate to be labelled as a NIMBY, you know.
And it's hard to label him one. He's not objecting to intensification, which is the typical gripe of NIMBYs in Auckland. He's objecting to an already existing house being built up and towering over his. And his objection is unique because the renovation potentially shouldn't even have resource consent. I asked Gary if he'd accept an apology from Alistair Raw.
With his attitude, I don't think that would happen. That's his style of doing things.
Now Gary's considering leaving Beaconsfield Street after 82 years.
I've only got a few years to go here now, and I thought I could have lived it out with quiet lifestyle, but we'll wait and see on that.
Wait and see how much sunlight his kitchen gets. For Checkpoint, Zach Fleming.
Now, as Zach said, Alistair Raw, Gary's neighbour, has declined to be interviewed. Auckland Council wasn't available for an interview today, but at the end of last month, when this was first reported, it said it will help people affected as best it can. We'd love some material qualification of what that actually means. This could include helping people apply for new consents, the waiving of fees and facilitation of mediation between consent holders and their neighbours. But what say the building is already up in breach? What happens then? Alan Webb is the lawyer who brought this consenting bungle to the attention of Auckland Council, a specialist in environmental and resource management law. Mr Webb was contacted by a homeowner in St Mary's Bay, which is kind of on the other side of Ponsonby from Grey Lynn. They were in a similar situation to Gary. So Mr Webb contacted the council saying he believed his client's neighbour's consent was unlawfully issued. He says the council at first fobbed him off. But after some back and forth, it agreed to seek a determination from the Environment Court. And that's how we got to where we are today. The Environment Court ruled that his client's neighbour's consent wasn't processed properly. And then the council identified 429 other consents it had bungled. 429. Zach Fleming spoke to Mr Webb this afternoon and asked him why the consents, which are potentially unlawful, can still stand until they're challenged in the High Court.
There's one school of thought that says, well, if the proper process wasn't followed, then the consent is void from the beginning, as if, you know, it's not a valid piece of paper. But if it was done correctly, would the decision be different? And it's the second limb of that equation that has to be tested in the High Court.
Should the council be doing more than it is doing at the moment? I know legally they potentially cannot cancel the consents, but should they be looking into whether they should have been issued in the first place?
Well, yeah. I mean, there's no reason why, off their own bat or off their own volition, and it would be completely outside the standard resource consent process. I suppose that they could reanalyse the consents and form a view quite independently of any formal process about whether or not these consents are valid. I mean, there's nothing stopping them from doing that. But, I mean, they've then got to... I mean, if you put yourself in the shoes of the person that's got the consent, they've also done nothing wrong. They've relied on this consent. They've started building, and the council then turns around and says, well, actually, you know what? We shouldn't have issued that consent in the first place. So...
But ultimately, it always falls back to the council, no matter what way you look at it, right? It's the council that has made the mistake, so surely it should be the council that should be doing everything they can to fix the mistake, whether the fixing of the mistake is correcting the impact on the neighbour or correcting the impact on the household, or even both at the same time, right? It should not still fall on the council to fix those mistakes?
Well, yeah, I mean, like I said, logically that should follow, but legally they may not have an obligation just to do that.
Right. But obligation aside, it's not always a question of whether you...
Well, I suppose, I mean, there's a legal dimension and a moral dimension, is I suppose what you're putting to me. You know, moral in the sense of should they do the right thing, and legal, do they have to? And quite often, you know, those two are different paths. But, I mean, if the council truly wanted to sort that out, then yeah, I mean, I'd suppose that there's ways and means for them to do that. So, yeah, I mean... Hopefully the council will go above and beyond in these mediation sessions to try and get settlements that are as equitable as possible for all concerned. I mean, even the classic rule of thumb is a good settlement is one where no one's happy, which means that everyone's had to give up a little bit of something to get there. But this is really quite serious, because if you've got a person who has benefited from a technically unlawful consent, you know, they're going to have a value attributed to their property once renovated that they possibly ought not to have got in the first place. And equally, the people next door may well suffer a diminution in their value through no fault of their own either. So there's some quite big issues at play here, you know, and they're quite central to people's livelihoods.
That is Alan Webb, who is the lawyer who first raised this consenting bungle with the Auckland Council, talking to Zach Fleming. Lots of feedback coming in already. This is an interesting text that we've received. Thank you. A view is not protected under the Resource Management Act. Additionally, a consent can be obtained for a building that does not comply with a district plan if there are no effects more than minor. That means it's unlikely that most of the incorrectly approved consents can be withdrawn or overturned. In other words, it sounds like, if that interpretation of the law is correct, people are stuck with this stuff. Lots of other texts bouncing in as I speak, and I really appreciate that. We'll come back to them, but let's go to the Atlantic coast of the United States. This storm is a monster, said the governor of North Carolina, Roy Cooper, talking about Hurricane Florence, of course. This is hurricane season in that part of the Atlantic. Hurricane Katrina was late August, Hurricane Wilma was October, Hurricane Maria, that did such terrible damage in Puerto Rico, was in September of last year. And while Florence may not be a Category 5, it's big and it's slow moving, which means it lingers. and the communities it hits will be hit hard. US President Donald Trump has signed declarations of emergency for both North Carolina and South Carolina, and officials have already declared states of emergency there and in Virginia, Maryland and the District of Columbia. More than 1 million people have already been ordered to evacuate their homes, with Florence not expected to make landfall until Friday morning US time. Bridget Burke reports.
This storm is a monster. It's big and it's vicious. It is an extremely dangerous, life-threatening, historic hurricane.
North Carolina Governor Roy Cooper warning of days and days of rain and potentially deadly flooding as the exodus begins. Millions of people today fleeing the eastern coastline of the United States in preparation for Hurricane Florence. In the outskirts suburbs of the Carolina coast, residents stocked up at supermarkets and filled their cars with petrol, many unsure where they would end up.
Lines going all the way out to the roadways. We grabbed water yesterday, so we have water to get out of here. But these are the smart people here, loading up on gas, because it's going to be a long travel out of here.
Just 3 months after a deadly flood swept through Main Street in Ellicott City, Maryland, residents and business owners are bracing themselves for a monster hurricane. Business owners along the street spent the day boarding up their storefronts and laying sandbags. Crews were also busy installing drainage pipes and tubing to help divert water from properties throughout the business district. Fierce winds and massive waves are expected to lash the coasts of North and South Carolina and Virginia even before Hurricane Florence makes landfall. Linda Jones owns the Tea on the Tiber Tea Room in Ellicott City. The community was still rebuilding after a 1 in 1,000 year flood in 2016 when devastating flash flooding struck once again earlier this year, giving Linda only enough time to escape with her cash register. She says she and others are losing sleep over what to expect from a Category 4 storm because her business may face a storm surge from one direction and runoff from the other.
We've talked about that scenario, and if that scenario happens, we're all underwater. We're all underwater because you're talking 20 feet of water.
Packing maximum sustained winds of 225 kilometres an hour, Florence is expected to grow stronger and larger.
Everybody's frightened. We get frightened. We have panic attacks if they mention rain. You know, we can't sleep. You know, every time they have an alert, it's like, you know, I start crying, you know, because that's how you feel. You feel like your whole life is on hold, you know, and it's devastating. It really is. It's devastating. I'm not gonna lie. So, we've been through hell.
In North Carolina, where authorities warn the storm surge could be up to 4 metres, residents were helping businesses prepare.
We're going to be working all day tomorrow up until the curfew to try to get everybody squared away, and hopefully we can all of Wilmington can stick together and let's fight this thing together. Everybody look out for everybody. That's what it's all about.
Wilmington resident Lynn Daniel was stocking up on jib to board up his windows.
Well, I think that's probably the biggest thing is just the category. And of course, I haven't lived down here all my life, obviously, but some people have. I got a son-in-law that's lived down here, and he's basically said he thinks this is for real. Whereas before we've had some that have, you know, predicted to come on in, but they ended up kind of doing something a little bit and didn't do much damage. But this one sure has all the numbers and recipe for a storm that can do some damage. So I'm just getting ready for it.
US President said no expense would be spared in responding to what he predicted would be mass destruction caused by the hurricane.
I would say everybody should get out. I mean, you have to listen to your local authorities.
But as Mr. Trump warned about the dangers posed by Florence, he took time to praise his government's response to 2017's Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico, which he called incredibly successful.
I actually think it was one of the best jobs that's ever been done with respect to what this is all about.
Hurricane Maria was also a Category 4 hurricane, and the death toll was recently revised from just 64 to almost 3,000. Authorities say if Hurricane Florence stays on track, tropical storm force winds could extend nearly 500 kilometres across 3 states. For Checkpoint, Bridget Burke.
It's 24 and a half minutes past 5. Thanks for being with us on Checkpoint. Unions say they're worried Labor may cave to pressure from New Zealand First and ditch a controversial planned Labour law change. New Zealand First has flagged concerns about legislation before the House that would stop employers from opting out of MECA's multi-employer collective agreements, saying they may not work in the regions. That's negotiations, MECA negotiations. National says such open disagreement over a bill with cabinet sign-off is further evidence of the rift within the government. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
Under multi-employer collective agreements, unions can negotiate terms and conditions across several companies or organisations within the same industry. Under the National-led government, employers were able to opt out at the beginning of MECA negotiations, but under this government's proposed law change, that option would be removed. Dennis Marga from the First Union says these agreements are flexible enough to suit both the regions and the big cities.
Every time we negotiate with employers, we always look into or take consideration the economic situation of companies and regions. So we will always take that on board. So I don't think it should be a problem.
The PSA's Glenn Barclay also says MECAs are useful for ensuring all employers in a particular industry are providing fair terms and conditions. He says there is concern New Zealand First may pressure Labour into backing off the proposed change.
We are a bit worried about that. We do want these provisions to go through. We do recognise that there are three parties involved in this government and that can lead to tensions. But we're hopeful that New Zealand First will understand the importance of this measure.
Nationals leader Simon Bridges says there's now open disagreement over the opt-out provision.
It's quite clear, though, there does seem to be some sort of rift in the government around the Employment Relations Bill. We're pleased at that at one level because we think this is the single worst thing the government is doing economically.
The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says the government's forging ahead and any discussions about support are part and parcel of operating a coalition.
We have ongoing negotiations around a range of issues. We always utilise the cabinet process to finalise them, but this is not unique. I do want to reflect, we are coming up to the 1-year anniversary of this coalition government. We are the purest form of MMP government that New Zealand has had, and I am incredibly proud of what we have achieved together over the past year.
Simon Bridges says that's glossing over what's really happening.
I think people are talking about the tail wagging the dog for the first time right now in this government, and that's because we're seeing on a range of things, actually, New Zealand First, at least looking like or talking like they'll pull the rug out from Labour's feet. This one's dear to Labour's heart.
If New Zealand First is really opposed to parts of the bill, it could work with National to make the legislation a bit more palatable. A prospect put to New Zealand First leader and Deputy Prime Minister Winston Peters.
Look, the objective of every parliamentarian is to work with every other parliamentarian when you've got positive policy. Thank you very much.
So you could work with National over Labour?
The legislation also removes the 90-day trial periods for big business and brings back guaranteed meal breaks. It's been reported back to Parliament by Select Committee, but as yet does not have a scheduled date for the next reading in the House. And of course, the next time each individual party has to cast a vote for or against. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
It's 28 minutes past 5. Ko te tīmatanga tēnei o te wiki o te reo Māori. Yes, it's Māori Language Week, and the theme this year is Kia kaha te reo Māori, or keep the Māori language strong. A challenge for us all to give the language a go. Our responsibility is the effort. Unless, perhaps, you work at McDonald's in Te Rapa. There, a worker was left angry and upset after being told she couldn't speak Māori, which is, of course, an official language when she's on the work floor. Janine Eru Taueki says her shift manager at McDonald's Te Rapa told her to stop using te reo last week after receiving complaints from customers and staff. However, McDonald's says it was a misunderstanding, and it will now review its policy of staff being only allowed to speak English on the work floor. Te Manu Kōrehi reporter John Boynton filed this report.
If you've ever gone through the drive-thru at McDonald's Te Rapa, you may have heard this greeting from Janine Eru Taueki. Miss Eru Taueki grew up only speaking te reo and uses it when greeting customers. So when her shift manager told her last Thursday she wasn't allowed to use te reo at the restaurant, she couldn't believe what she was hearing.
I got angry. I've never been told not to speak Māori. That's my first language. I had said that I could that te reo Māori was the only language that was spoken. To be told not to speak Māori just hurt. I got so angry.
Miss Edu Taueki says she had to take a break to calm down and then carried on with her night shift. She says her shift manager told her the directive came from the restaurant's manager, but she's yet to receive a response from McDonald's about the incident. Most customers, she says, enjoy her sprinkling te reo into her greetings.
Last week leading up to the Wiki o Te Reo Māori, I was saying, like, was there Coke for your ine, your drink? It's not as if I was speaking Māori fully throughout the whole duration of taking the customer's order, so I was translating for them so they would understand.
And she says there's an important reason why she took a stand on the issue.
I want Te Reo Māori to be normalised, just so we can also get to speak Māori. I'm really passionate about my language because it is who I am.
McDonald's New Zealand spokesperson Simon Kenny says there was a misunderstanding about who complained about the use of reo by Miss Edu Taueki.
She'd been speaking with another crew person, and today a different staff member complained to the management around the policy of only speaking English.
Mr Kenny says McDonald's New Zealand is now reviewing its policy of staff speaking English only while working.
We think the policy should actually reflect the official languages of New Zealand, so we'll be updating our policy so that it means that English, Māori or sign language can be used when staff are working.
Mr Kenny says the fast food chain is keen to resolve the situation.
McDonald's at a national level, and our franchisee who Janine works for, are disappointed and don't want to hear that she's been saddened by the experience, and that's why we want to meet up with her and talk through things, and hopefully she can see that the changes that have come as a result are positive.
Meanwhile, Janine Edu Taueki says she'll continue to use te reo Māori, so you'll still hear her ask,
Kia ora, so shora ringariri.
Mo te hōtaka o te ahi pōnei, ko John Boynton aho.
You're with Checkpoint on RNZ. Thanks for being with us. Coming up on the program, Dunedin parents on edge after reports of 4 suspicious approaches to primary school children during the past week. The Christchurch City Council votes tomorrow on whether it should spend most of a $300 million government rebuild fund on a new covered stadium. And Wellington knocks Auckland off the mantelpiece as the country's best place to visit, according to Lonely Planet, and clearly Katrina Batten, who's clapping beside me. We'd love your feedback. Text us 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, and of course our email address hasn't changed since emails were invented in 1873. checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. Madison next with business news, but here's KB with the headlines.
The Environment Minister David Parker has had a run-in with anti-1080 campaigners in Parliament after they threw fake poison pellets over the forecourt steps. Mr Parker went out to see what was happening and was hounded by protesters, but he left a short time afterward. New Zealand's top diplomat in Australia has told a parliamentary select committee in Canberra that Australia's deportation of New Zealanders is corrosive to the trans-Tasman relationship. High Commissioner Chris Seed told MPs today New Zealanders are being disproportionately penalised compared to other nationalities. McDonald's New Zealand will change its language policy after a worker was told she couldn't speak te reo Māori during work hours. Janine Edu Taueki says she was told by her manager at McDonald's Te Rapa in Hamilton to stop using te reo after receiving complaints. The Transport Minister says the government is considering harsher penalties for texting drivers. Currently, drivers caught texting behind the wheel are fined $80 and receive 20 demerit points. Phil Twyford says tougher penalties are required as a more effective deterrent. AA says if motorists don't start seeing the benefits of a fuel tax, they'll become increasingly frustrated with the extra cost. Aucklanders have forked out $13.2 million in the first month of the new regional fuel tax. The 11.5 cents a litre tax was added to fuel prices at the start of July to fund transport projects. A hot air balloon pilot says showing people how to turn off the gas in a balloon is a potentially lethal move. The Civil Aviation Authority is recommending that passengers preparing for balloon rides be briefed on how to shut off the gas. But pilot Dennis Hall says instructing passengers how to turn off the gas is like showing them how to turn off the engine of an aircraft. Those are the headlines. I'm back at 6 o'clock.
Thanks, I spoke the whole way through that, Katrina. I'm surprised you didn't whack me with your scripts.
Oh, that'll come.
Thanks. I look forward to it. Thanks very much. Madison Reedy is beside me on the other side of me in the studio. Ke te pia hea koe, Madison.
Ke te pai.
It's lovely to have you with us. The stock exchange has cut a deal with Wall Street. What is it?
It's a memorandum of understanding. So that's signed between the NZX and the NASDAQ. The NASDAQ is that tech-laden, that tech-heavy, the likes of your Apple, Amazon, Google, Netflix stock on Wall Street in New York. And this isn't the first deal of this kind. We have the same memorandum of understanding with Singapore and Hong Kong as well. Now, the NZX has come out today and they've said that this kind of global outreach is basically set up to promote dual listings between New Zealand companies on Wall Street, on the NASDAQ, so mostly our tech companies, and vice versa. And also they say that this will make the pathway to Wall Street easier, given this is the first type of this deal with Wall Street. And it will also make New Zealand companies that list there more available to US investors, which are typically a lot richer than the ones in this kind of small corner of the world. And the NZX has been undergoing a lot of changes recently, so this is kind of among those. But this one does seem a little bit out of whack because all of the other changes seem to be aiming to bolster the market here. What they want to do is increase and encourage listings on the New Zealand stock market here. They have actually been decreasing over time, particularly if you look at the past couple of years. They have been decreasing. They're losing more companies than they're gaining. This year they're going to lose Tegel as that's taken over by a Philippines food company. They're about to lose Tilt, which is also listed in Australia. Those its two majority shareholders are two companies, Infratil and Mercury, have already said that when they do take it over, they're going to delist it. And also there's only one company that plans to list, so the opposite direction, onto the NZX this year, which is an automotive company. So this deal is a little bit out of line, and so it's a little bit up in the air as to whether or not this will actually have that purpose that they want it to.
Yeah. Fonterra, big day for them tomorrow, and therefore, I guess, for the economy, the country as a whole. What's on the cards?
Yeah, so Fonterra not only is the dairy giant, is New Zealand's largest company. So tomorrow is its financial year 18 results. So very big day, certainly for us, and even more so for them. So they are releasing their results at 8:30 a.m. That's when the NZX, the stock market, opens. So that'll drop the second it does. And then they're also holding a press conference at their place in Auckland, down by the waterfront. So they're holding a big press conference there with media at 10:30, and that'll be the first time that the new CEO, interim CEO Miles Hurrell, and the new chairman will front together. We've obviously heard from the chair, and we've heard slightly from the new CEO when it was announced at the half year. So it'll be the first time they front together. Analysts are saying that what they say will be more important than the financial results, because we already know the financial results are going to be bad. I mean, that's the whole reason for them kind of calling media in to talk about it. So we're expecting the expectations there for the financial results are about a $150 million loss. So that's kind of accounting into the write-downs they've already flagged. So at the half year, they already had a write-down of $385 million. So we're expecting it to be not so good in the full year, but sales are expected to be up. And also what the CEO says about its investment in that Chinese company being made will be kind of remain to be seen as well. That'll be quite interesting. The last chief executive, even when everything turned sour with being made, he was still really positive about it, and he kind of refused to pull out of it even after 2 very negative years with it. So it'll be quite interesting to see what the new CEO has to say about that. It may be that he's very inward looking.
I look forward to your coverage of that tomorrow night. That is a big story. Thanks, Madison. What happened on the markets today?
We closed down about 1/3%. That's after that huge surge that we had last night. So that's down about 30 points to close at 9,196. The New Zealand dollar's buying at 65.1 US cents, 91.7 Australian, and 50 British pence.
I'm just going to cough. Let's kill the mics. You're a lovely Jeremy Ansell. God, you're a pro. Dunedin parents, thanks, Madison. Dunedin parents and schools are on edge after reports of 4 suspicious approaches to primary school children during the past week. On one occasion, a man attempted to lure a primary school-aged girl into his vehicle by saying he wanted to help look for a lost puppy. Police have been tight-lipped about the recent developments in the case. Our Otago Southern reporter, Timothy Brown, has this report.
On Tuesday last week, in the Western Hill suburb of Halfway Bush, a man in his vehicle approached a young girl on her way to primary and was scared off by a member of the public. Then on Monday morning, another girl was approached by a man in his vehicle, this time pleading for help to find a lost puppy. She refused. That incident occurred less than 5 kilometres from Halfway Bush in the neighbouring suburb of Wakari. Then on Tuesday morning, a primary school in North Dunedin reported one of its pupils had been approached on the way to school. again only a few kilometres from Monday's incident. The set of events have parents concerned.
Well, I mean, it's upsetting that these things do happen, but I mean, the school's been amazing, and they've made the kids feel like, you know, they're safe when they're at school and all the rest of it, and everyone's been pretty vigilant.
It's pretty scary, but yeah, I mean, we're just got to be vigilant, I guess, yeah.
And have you had those conversations as a result?
They already did a study at school all about it last term, so she was already pretty onto it. We've already had those discussions in the past, so she knows stranger danger.
It doesn't affect me too much because I'm so aware of where my son is, so I'm picking him up and dropping him off. But I think if he was a bit older and he was walking to and from school, it would be a whole different situation, and I'd feel very uncomfortable about it.
Police today refused to be interviewed on the matter, and though they confirmed yesterday they were investigating 3 approaches, by deadline today they could not tell us how many incidents have been reported. The mother of a 4th child told local media her 9-year-old son was startled by a vehicle he felt was following him while walking home from school on Monday afternoon. In earlier interviews, police have not ruled out that some or all of the incidents may be linked. They are yet to provide a description of any vehicles or offenders. Otago Primary Principals Association President Chris McKinlay says parents and schools are on alert.
If parents and schools are taking this seriously and just talking with their children, then hopefully the police will catch up with these particular people pretty soon, and we can get back to life as normal.
He says children are taught the skills to keep themselves safe through a program delivered by the police.
We've just reminded the children of the things they learned during the Keeping Ourselves Safe program, making sure that you have a plan and you know where you're supposed to be going, that you don't go with anybody you don't know. You know, the things like if someone was to approach you to say no, and those sort of practices that are a part of the Keeping Ourselves Safe program, just reminding them to children, making sure they're fresh in their minds.
Dunedin Mayor Dave Cull says the incidents are understandably upsetting for the city.
Obviously, these people approaching children is very concerning and will be particularly concerning for parents of the children. The police advice is good. Be alert, be vigilant, give your kids good advice, and so far it seems that the kids have acted really well.
Dave Cull says it is not indicative of usual activity in Dunedin.
It obviously is of concern, but it's not representative of the city as a whole. We know that Dunedin is perceived as overwhelmingly a very safe environment for kids.
Anyone with information about the incidents is asked to contact police. Kei o te poti ahau mo te hōtaka o te ahi nei, ko Timothy Brown tēnei.
18 minutes to 6. The government will pay a convicted murderer $10,000 in compensation after he asked to be sent to solitary confinement for longer than was legal so he could wean himself off drugs. It's the first time the government has decided to pay compensation for breaching an international human rights treaty, and it says it can't rule it out happening again. Ben Strang reports.
John Vogel was convicted of the murder of Auckland man Peter Hoey in 1988. Mr. Hoey was found with scissors embedded in his side and more than 45 stab wounds, while banana skins had been thrown at his body. Vogel was released on parole a decade later, but recalled to prison for drug offences. He spent 3 weeks in solitary confinement, and while he had requested that length of time, his lawyer, Tony Ellis, says the judge should have known better.
He rationalised this by saying that John had asked for the additional punishment because he wanted to get off drugs, but then if he'd asked for the death penalty, which is also unlawful, he wouldn't have got that. And you shouldn't ever be locked up in solitary confinement if you're effectively a junkie.
In solitary confinement, Vogel had just 1 hour each day to shower and exercise. He had no access to radio or television and wasn't allowed to make phone calls or receive visitors. The UN Committee Against Torture ruled this breached his human rights because he was held for 6 days longer than legally allowed. The Justice Minister, Andrew Little, says the government will pay $10,000 in compensation and cover part of Vogel's legal costs. And he doesn't rule out having to deal with similar cases in the future.
I couldn't rule out that there have been other incidents historically where people have been detained, whether in solitary confinement or otherwise, for a longer period than they should have been. That might lead to a claim. I'm not aware of any specific claims at this point, though.
It marks the first time the government has paid compensation to the victim of a human rights breach. Christine McCarthy of the Howard League says it's a positive step, but she's not sure it will spark change in the prison system.
Even the fact that we still have 15 days in solitary confinement as a disciplinary punishment, there are huge mental health consequences for some people when they are put in isolation like that. So it's quite a nasty punishment. So I think we have a long way to go in order to really protect the human rights of prisoners.
Vogel's lawyer, Tony Ellis, says compensation does mark a major step forward.
Never before have the government recognised a win before an international human rights tribunal by paying compensation, and this may well encourage more people to make international claims.
Tony Ellis is now hopeful about the prospects for another 2 inmates who the UN Human Rights Committee ruled were kept in punishing conditions after their non-parole period had finished. The committee said the government should immediately review facilitating their release, give them reparation compensation and amend the law so it doesn't happen again. For Checkpoint, Corben Strangtene.
When the government and farming sector bodies announced the country's response to Mycoplasma bovis would be to eradicate it, it was an audacious plan. Central to it was a compensation scheme which would see infected stock culled, farms disinfected and then lie fallow for 60 days, at which stage they could be restocked. To restock, farmers need money, of course, and early on compensation being paid out in periods as short as 10 days was being talked about. But in some cases it's taking months, and they can be tough months. No stock, no income, no money to repopulate. Graham Butcher is a sheep and beef farm consultant who's been working on behalf of farmers with M. bovis. I asked him how many he's representing.
I've got 8 people, mostly in Southland, who I'm helping with their compensation claims.
Right, and so where are they at? They've all lost their stock, their bovis stock, have they?
Yes, all at different sorts of stages of the compensation claim, I suppose. Most of them have lost stock. Some of them have reared calves to sell at 100 Ks and they're only just getting rid of those animals now, which creates another suite of problems, I suppose. So each farm has its own peculiar issues about the impact of Mycoplasma bovis. There's no one rule that fits all. Every farm's different.
But I guess what we can say is that people who have lost stock need compensation in order to be able to carry on as a business, right?
Yes, they do.
And how are they going with getting that compensation?
It tends to take a while. Even a simple one like claiming for calves that were destroyed can take months.
And if it's taking months to get compensation, how do people repopulate? Do they have the money to do that? Are the banks prepared to lend them money in advance of the compensation arriving?
Well, I think the banks have been reasonably good about doing things like that, but I know of some cases where the banks have been looking sideways about whether or not they should fund repopulation problems before claims are actually paid. So, yeah, it is a problem.
Is it taking too long to get the compensation through? And this is an unprecedented event in its scale in New Zealand history. So there are inevitably going to be teething problems. But is it taking too long?
I think it probably is. Maybe some of the claims that are put in have been delayed. There may have been issues delaying the claims from the farmer's end, so it's possibly not all MPI's issue, that one. For example, you may have had mitigation procedures put in to counter the loss of income, and they take time to happen, and it's part of the claim, so you've got to wait till that's sort of all wrapped up before you put a claim in. So, but, you know, a calf claim, claiming for animals destroyed is relatively simple claim, shouldn't be taking months.
Right, so that is pretty straightforward. There is a certain number of calves, they have been destroyed. It is that simple.
Yes.
And the compensation payments in those cases are also still taking months.
Yes.
Can we use an example, because they have appeared on Checkpoint, and so we've talked about them on this program before, and that's Sarah Flintoff and Ben Walling. You're representing Sarah and Ben, aren't you?
Yes.
And how are they going with their compensation?
Slow. Like, for example, claiming in for some calves destroyed on 4th of April, only just been offered today, I think it was. So, you know, it's a fair amount of time.
Wait a sec, so you're saying a claim went in on the 4th of April, is that the correct date?
Yep.
and they've received payment for that claim today.
They've received an offer for settlement on that particular claim today.
Wow, that's a hell of a long time, isn't it? And was that on dead calves?
Well, a relatively simple one, yes it is, and I know for a fact there's some far more complex claims about to get up to Wellington from a number of people. So it does concern me a bit how long they might take.
What's your message to MPI? What would you like MPI to be doing that they're not doing?
What are they not doing? It's all related to the speed of getting things done, and Crown Law officers involved in this as well. The claims or some of the claims have got to go through them, so there's probably delays there. More people on the ground, I suppose, more people who know a lot more about farming, and being able to ring Wellington, talk to someone, discuss an issue and get an indication of how that might be viewed.
Thanks, Graham.
And those things happening quickly as well, because, farming, if you're repopulating, a line of cattle might come up tomorrow and you might only have 12 hours to decide whether to buy them or not. So things need to happen quickly.
Graham Butcher. We turn now to cricket, and the White Ferns, the New Zealand women's team, have a new skipper. She's Canterbury's Amy Satterthwaite, who's been playing for the White Ferns since 2007. More on Amy in a moment, but this is a high-calibre changing of the guard because the woman she's taking over from is Susie Bates, an all-rounder who's the highest run scorer in the history of the White Ferns, a batting average of 44 and 115 one-day internationals. She's a remarkable player. But to maintain her love of the game, Susie's stepping down from the captaincy she's held since 2011, and Amy Satterthwaite is stepping up. The veteran of 113 one-day internationals, she too is an all-rounder who's been playing first-class cricket since she was 16, and she's delighted to become captain of the national side.
Oh, look, it's a massive honour. I think it came as a real surprise that Susie was standing down. She's done a fantastic job over the years and is just a real natural leader, but to be given the opportunity to captain your country is just something that I didn't really think would happen, and like I said, it's a massive honour.
Yeah, you've been playing first-class cricket for half your life, though, very nearly.
I have.
Yeah, and you've been captain of the Canterbury Magicians for, what, 10 years now?
Yeah, I've been really fortunate to have that role for, I think, 8 or 9 years, and the last season I stepped down from that just with being away so much with, the likes of the Women's Big Bash, and Frances Mackay has been taking that over. But yeah, I've been fortunate to have that sort of leadership role there for quite some time now.
And I know some people who tell me you're really highly regarded and that your judgment is considered excellent.
Oh, that's very kind, John. I think I've been fortunate to have some pretty exceptional players in Canterbury over the years, and I think that's then shown in the results that we've had and winning a lot of competitions. But yeah, I've certainly enjoyed the leadership opportunities that I've had there over the time.
How do you captain a cricket team? Because in some crucial respects, it's not really a team sport, is it? I mean, when you're facing or when you're bowling, you are essentially on your own.
I think that's the beauty of the game, is it is a real, I guess, art in terms of how you do probably lead a side, and it is bringing together a bunch of individuals to try and perform together as a team. And there are times within the sport that you have to really play for the team and make decisions in how you go about the way that you're playing to benefit the side, and it's quite a courageous thing to do. So I guess it's trying to get the best out of, like you say, every individual in those moments, and then bring the team together as a collective. But it certainly is a unique sport from that sense.
And it's fascinating, isn't it, the psychological management of players? And you've been through this. So you a World Player of the Year in 2017, 4 consecutive centuries, a record only ever matched by Kumar Sangakkara. Extraordinary. But you've also had times where you just couldn't find form. And is it the kind words, the thoughtful words, the constructive criticisms, or the safety nets of good captaincy that save you at times like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think building confidence in players is something that's really important, and probably especially in cricket where it can be a really fickle sport. And 1 minute, like you say, you can be on cloud 9 and performing every week, and then the next week you're sort of really struggling to find that form. And it might be that you get a run of just some extremely good deliveries that undo you, and you don't necessarily feel out of form, but on paper it certainly looks like you are. And
I think, like you say, that building confidence in players is a massive part of the role, and enabling them to be able to perform at their best week in, week out.
And it is increasingly a sport that's being played on the telly, right? All of a sudden, you're starting to be paid some money belatedly, and only, I know, when you're playing, I guess that's why you go to the Big Bash, isn't it? To actually make a living playing cricket, right?
Oh, look, it certainly helps out. I think it's we're very fortunate, probably half a dozen of us that are able to play around the world in those leagues and get those opportunities that, certainly mean that we can put cricket in the forefront of our lives, I guess.
Yeah, but you've got the T20 Worlds coming up in the West Indies, right?
We do, which is very exciting, and we're really looking forward to it. It's going to be a massive challenge.
Yeah, how do you feel about your team?
Look, we're feeling really good. I think it's something that probably over the years we've had, really strong sides going into some of these World Cups, and we've had sides that, teams look at us and think that, that New Zealand team could win. And I certainly think going over to the West Indies that we're no different to that. And so that's really exciting. But the challenge for us as a group is to probably get rid of a bit of a monkey off our back in the last few years of late, and that we haven't been able to win one of these major World Cups, and that's something that we're certainly not shying away from and looking forward to the challenge.
Yeah, on paper it's a hell of a good team. On paper it's a team good enough to do it, isn't it?
Absolutely. I think you have to believe in the people that are on the park, and that's part of the battle, and if you can have that confidence and belief, then that certainly helps you get over the line.
Amy Satterthwaite, who's taking over from Susie Bates as captain of the White Ferns. Two fine cricketers, two fine New Zealand women. It's home to the country's biggest beehive in Cape Town, and now, for the first time, Wellington has been named the country's best place to visit, pushing Auckland off the mantelpiece. Travel guide Lonely Planet has just released its latest book about New Zealand, naming 20 must-see destinations and things to do. So Jonathan Mitchell went for a wander around the streets of Wellington to see whether what Lonely Planet tells you to do is worth doing.
It's a little city, but it's big on the unexpected and unconventional. A colourful place, according to Lonely Planet's newest guide, despite most people are dressed in black. The travel guide says Wellington's coffees, craft beers, restaurants and art scene give the capital an edgy yet sociable vibe, and the erratic weather only adds zest. Unique and quirky bars and shops are dotted throughout the city, but it's the cafes and restaurants, more per head than New York, which you can't escape. Rodney Powell, who runs family business Coffee Cult with her mum, says coffee runs through Wellington's veins, but there's more to the city than what you can find in the CBD.
We don't have to drive far to get to, a beautiful spot, Mount Vic, Oriental Bay and Lau Bay. It's just all within about 10-20 minutes drive, really, or bus, if you can navigate the bus at the moment.
Daravit Powell thinks it's good. Auckland has been knocked down the list.
I personally prefer Wellington, is just because we're a little quirky little capital. We're just not a bit more laid back than everywhere else. Sure, everyone likes to work, but we just like to lay back as well. Relax, yeah.
Lonely Planet's New Zealand spokesperson Chris Zaya says Wellington is a special place which has lots to offer and is easy to walk around.
Way back in 2011, Lonely Planet coined Wellington the coolest little capital in the world when it made our top 10 list of cities to visit. And I think ever since we've been having this kind of love affair with what we called the coolest little capital. And it's great to see that it's actually topped our list.
He was unaware about the city's recent bus woes, which have caused delays and cancellations for grumpy residents. The Mayor Justin Lester says no city is perfect, but he thinks on the whole Wellington is a great place to live and visit, even with the wind.
Yeah, it's good to have a nice gentle breeze from time to time in our city as well, but that's what helps make the place a bit wild, a bit interesting. A nice gentle breeze in Wellington, a gentle zephyr.
Auckland has fallen from first place to fourth this time around because of its transport congestion and inner city construction. And Christchurch doesn't get a mention in this edition, but it does include Waiheke Island, Kaikoura, Queenstown and the West Coast. Māori culture, rugby and skiing also feature. Chris Zaya says Wellington can bankroll its newfound praise.
Definitely to come in at number one, it really says that it's a destination that's doing a lot of things right. And, you know, there's the real opportunity for all kind of traders, anybody that wants those tourist dollars coming in their door. They've got the real opportunity to kind of leverage that number one ranking.
He says the New Zealand Guide, which is published every couple of years, is one of its most popular reads and is translated into 5 different languages. For Checkpoint, called Jonathan Mitchell, tēnei.
It's coming to 6 o'clock. Received a couple of texts saying that the Kaimai Ranges, which is between Tauranga and Matamata, of course, going over the hill there, has been close by a car crash. We'll just get onto NZTA and try and confirm that. If you are in the vicinity and that is indeed correct and you feel like corroborating that, do text us 2101.
It's been closed for 2 or 3 hours.
Oh, is it? Thanks, yeah. KB. Oh, corroboration from my left. Man alive, that's good service. Oh, it's Pips saying, Amir, it's old news.
Yeah,
oh,
it's about
shut
3
up.
o'clock this afternoon.
Oh, shut up. Let's listen to the Pips.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui, good evening. Ko Katrina Batten tēnei. Ban 1080 protesters have strewn fake pellets of the poison and laid dead birds and mice on Parliament's forecourt steps this afternoon. They did so at the same time politicians were heading to the House for question time and found an audience with the Environment Minister. Here's our political reporter Gia Garrick.
The protesters fired questions at David Parker but wouldn't accept any of his answers, while officials in protective gear picked up the fake 1080 pellets. Protesters have been in Wellington since the weekend and Parliament's entranceways have been covered in chalk drawings and phrases since. It's attracted politicians' attention. The Greens' Marama Davidson says that wouldn't be her choice of protest, and National's Simon Bridges says they've gone a bit far. Atuiti Whare Parimata, ko Gia Garrick aho.
Some Auckland drivers say they're now already feeling the impact of the new regional fuel tax on their pockets. Drivers there have forked out more than $13 million in the first month of the new tax. The 11.5 cents a litre tax was added to fuel prices on the 1st of July and will be put towards transport projects. Motorists RNZ News spoke to say people driving long distances are being hit the hardest and public transport isn't a viable alternative. The motorist lobby group AA says the onus is now on the council and government to ensure motorists see the benefits of the fuel tax.
Seems like it's a little bit excessive. I mean, they take enough of our money with tax. So, I mean, why do they have to tax fuel even more? It's kind of ridiculous. I work hard for my money and I'd like to see at least some of it go towards me instead of fuel.
A government report into whether fuel companies are spreading the extra cost to other regions is due out in October. The Transport Minister says the government is considering harsher penalties for texting drivers. Phil Twyford says it's not possible to safely text and drive. Currently, drivers caught texting behind the wheel are fined $80 and receive 20 demerit points. Mr Twyford says tougher penalties are required as a more effective deterrent. He says the Acting Associate Transport Minister James Shaw is leading the work on the penalties. New Zealand's top diplomat in Australia has told a parliamentary select committee in Canberra that Australia's deportation of New Zealanders has been corrosive to the Trans-Tasman relationship. High Commissioner Chris Seed appeared before the Joint Standing Committee on Migration today. He says the legal processes around deporting long-term residents on character grounds and without convictions is less than robust. Mr Seed says tighter rules introduced in 2014, combined with laws stripping New Zealanders of automatic residence status from 2001, have seen the rate of New Zealanders being deported increase 7-fold in 3 years. He says they're being disproportionately penalised compared to other nationalities. Dunedin schools, pupils and parents can't wait to see an end to a series of suspicious approaches to primary school children. There are reports of at least 4 children being startled or confronted while walking to or from school in the past week. The events have schools on edge. The Otago Primary Principals Association President Chris McKinley says everyone is doing what they can.
If parents and schools are taking this seriously and just talking with their children, then hopefully the police will catch up with these particular people pretty soon and we can get back to life as normal.
Chris McKinley says school pupils are given information to keep themselves safe and these incidents have highlighted the importance of that. Wellington's Regional Council is considering an independent review of new bus routes and timetables put in place in July. Since the network changed, commuters have been complaining of long delays, missing buses, or buses showing up too full to board. The council has already brought in an international expert to help, and there are calls from local MPs for the government to step in. It's also been revealed the Transport Minister Phil Twyford raised concerns about the new network months before it was introduced. McDonald's New Zealand will change its language policy after a worker was told she couldn't speak te reo Māori during work hours. Janine Eru Taueki says her shift manager at McDonald's Te Rapa in Hamilton told her to stop using te reo after receiving complaints from customers and staff. But McDonald's New Zealand spokesperson Simon Kenny says there was a misunderstanding as the restaurant has not received complaints from customers. Mr Kenny says the policy will now be updated.
We think the policy should actually reflect the official languages of New Zealand, so we'll be updating our policy so that it means that English, Māori or sign language can be used when staff are working.
McDonald's spokesman Simon Kenny. It's 6:05. Sport, the veteran netball coach Norma Plummer is warning the Silver Ferns will bounce back from their miserable Commonwealth Games campaign and be a force in the upcoming Quad Series tournament. Plummer, the former Australia coach who's now in charge of South Africa, says the appointment of Nolene Taurua as coach and the return of veterans Laura Langman and Casey Korpua could restore the Silver Ferns to their former strength. The 5th edition of the Four Nation tournament begins in Auckland on Saturday, with New Zealand playing Commonwealth Games champions England and Plummer's South Africa taking on Australia. The tennis great Billie Jean King has backtracked on her original comments over Serena Williams' meltdown at the US Open. Williams, who was beaten by Japan's Naomi Osaka in the final, was docked a game for verbal abuse. She later called umpire Carlos Ramos sexist, saying he'd not have done the same with the male player. Following the match, King said on social media she fully supports Williams, but has now told CNN that the 23-time Grand Slam champion was out of line.
No one's saying she was a good sport, okay? If they are, they're crazy. She was totally out of line. She knows it. She knows it. He aggravated the situation instead of, I'm not attacking your character, was the most important thing he could have said.
Billie Jean King. Croatia have been brought back to earth after their runner-up finish at the recent Football World Cup, thumped 6-0 by Spain at the UEFA Nations League. That's the news.
Primary teachers ponder latest pay offer.
It's something, at least it's an offer, and it's better than the last offer, which was no better than the offer before, so it's something.
Plunkett remains at odds with the Nurses Union.
Our members are still concerned about what's going on, so to me, the issue still exists.
And power bill struggles.
It's just like, what the heck, how is it so high? Like, even just using the appliances at home, it's higher, like, it's like, what the heck?
Truth to Power, morning report, weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon, we analyse Fonterra's annual result. Will farmers be happy? And after 10, educator Vivian Robinson on how too much change in the school system can be counterproductive. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland to North Taranaki, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country. Fine today, cloudy periods developing south of Northland tomorrow morning. Gisborne to Wairarapa, fine apart from some high cloud tomorrow. South Taranaki to Wellington, cloudy periods. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, fine today, high cloud tomorrow. Bulla becoming cloudy this evening and drizzle developing tomorrow afternoon. For Westland and Fiordland, cloud increasing, drizzle developing south of the glaciers this evening, turning to rain in Fiordland tonight, then spreading to Westland tomorrow with heavy falls possible, rain easing to isolated showers south of the glaciers by tomorrow evening. Otago and Southland, mainly fine, brief rain tomorrow morning, and for the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods with the odd shower tomorrow morning. It's 6:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina Batten. We're going to pop out the studio windows, the RNZ doors into the Auckland traffic now, and if you're stuck in traffic somewhere in the city and looking at the fuel gauge with dread at the prospect of having to fill up again, it may be no consolation whatsoever to know that $13 million has been raised in the first month of the new regional fuel tax. The 11.5 cents a litre tax was added to petrol prices at the start of July to fund transport projects. It's expected to raise about $1.5 billion in the next decade. Auckland Council says the money collected has been put towards rural road safety upgrades in Rodney and Franklin already, gosh that's quick, and 6 red light safety cameras at dangerous intersections across the city. But what do Aucklanders think? Our reporter Annika Smith took to the streets to find out.
Petrol prices have topped $2.40 a litre in parts of Auckland, and some people are not happy about it. Liam Manson is from Tauranga but works in Auckland construction.
Seems like it's a little bit excessive. I mean, they take enough of our money with tax. So, I mean, why do they have to tax fuel even more? It's kind of ridiculous. I work hard for my money, and I'd like to see at least some of it go towards me instead of fuel.
He says the fuel tax is taking a toll.
It's crazy, especially for people who are travelling long distance like myself. If the company's not paying for it, it's coming out of your pocket and it's making a hell of a dent in it. $50 worth of fuel is nowhere near what I get now.
Henry Cowie says those living at the southern end of Auckland are getting a raw deal.
It's an extra $40 a week because we have to come so far from Waiuku all the way into the city. So it's certainly making a big difference to our weekly income.
Mr Cowie says poor public transport means driving into the city and forking out more for fuel is his only option.
I would have thought that maybe they would show us a little bit of mercy and say, well, seeing as you live so far out, that you could be exempt from some of the tax that the rest of the motorists are paying, just because there's a lack of proper public transport.
Gemma Edwards, a student living in Mount Eden, says she's not too badly affected because she doesn't need to use her car a lot, but she has noticed a difference at the pump too. She says if the council puts the tax towards public transport, it will soften the blow.
If they're going to invest that money into Auckland's transport system, I'm happy with that because at the moment it's atrocious. And I used to live on the shore, I now live in the city, so it doesn't bother me as much. The transport in the city is easier, but for the shore it was a nightmare.
But Caleb Brown says the new tax is fair.
I use all the roads, so I should be paying for that. And in Auckland we need more infrastructure, we don't have enough, and if it's going to cost more, it's something that has to happen.
Barney Irvine, an AA spokesman, says if motorists don't start seeing the benefits of a fuel tax, they'll become more and more frustrated.
All of this is asking a lot of motorists. I mean, not only are they looking at a regional fuel tax, they're also looking at a hike in the national fuel tax of 4 cents a litre from next month. And on top of that, we're seeing record high fuel prices. So the onus is really on the council and the government to deliver benefit.
Mr Irvine says the big question about fuel tax is whether fuel companies are passing on the cost of the tax in Auckland alone or spreading it to other regions. Mo te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Annika Smith aho.
If you've been asked to leave, get out. That's the warning from US emergency officials as Hurricane Florence barrels towards the southeast coast, the Atlantic coast. Of course, it's on track to become the first Category 4 storm to make a direct hit on the Carolinas in 6 decades. It's 800 kilometres wide and threatens to unleash deadly storm surges, torrential rain and severe flooding. What's amazing about this hurricane is how slowly it's moving. In other words, if it sits above you, it stays above you and does real damage. More than 1 million people have been ordered to leave their homes, and residents are being warned this storm cannot be underestimated or maybe overestimated. With more, here's the BBC's Gary O'Donoghue.
This is the calm before the storm. A storm that's barrelling towards the Carolinas with winds of up to 130 miles per hour expected to make landfall overnight Thursday into Friday.
This storm is a monster. It's big and it's vicious. It is an extremely dangerous, life-threatening, historic hurricane.
More than 1 million people have been ordered to leave coastal areas in both North and South Carolina, and some highways have been made one way to smooth the flow of hugely increased volumes of traffic.
People don't understand that when they say it's time to evacuate, there's no emergency services, the restaurants are closed, there's nothing else open. You need to go back and get back to the mainland so you've got some comforts.
But for those who've chosen to stay, it's been a panicked rush to buy essentials for the coming days.
Right now we're looking for water. We've been to Walmart and the shelves are clear. And then we stopped at Walgreens, the shelves were clear. And so we decided we'd bypass the water and come to Lowe's and get batteries.
As well as the threat to life, It's people's homes and businesses that are endangered by Florence. Everyone doing what they can to protect against Mother Nature.
Taping up the windows before throwing boards over them, making sure that the top seals and side seals on the windows are nice and caulked, so I don't got to worry about water dripping in through the top.
Concern over the sheer strength of Florence has also meant the Navy is moving around 30 ships out to sea, away from ports like Norfolk in Virginia, so they can sail away from the path of the hurricane and reduce the likelihood of being damaged. At a meeting in the White House this afternoon, the President was briefed by the director of FEMA. He said this would be the biggest storm in decades.
The safety of American people is my absolute highest priority. We are sparing no expense. We are totally prepared. We're ready. We're as ready as anybody's ever been.
Meteorologists say Hurricane Florence could bring a storm surge of up to 12 feet at the coast and anywhere between 20 and 30 inches of rain, making severe flooding far inland a real threat.
That report from Gary O'Donoghue. Let's head home to Ototahi, Christchurch, where the City Council will vote tomorrow on whether it should spend most of a $300 million government rebuild fund on a new covered stadium. Staff are recommending $220 million of it is spent on the project, which has long been called for by the likes of Canterbury Rugby. But as Dan Dalgetty reports, some think Christchurch has, well, more pressing needs.
Slow Cup is retained, and the All Blacks win at AMI Stadium by 20 points to 10.
The All Blacks beating Australia to retain the Bledisloe Cup on the 7th of August 2010. Neither the All Blacks, Canterbury or the Crusaders have ever played at Christchurch's AMI Stadium again. The devastating February 22, 2011 6.2 magnitude quake has robbed the city of a stadium large enough to host any All Blacks game since. It meant 7 2011 Rugby World Cup matches scheduled for the stadium that year were moved to other cities. And that's something rugby lovers like Belfast Rugby Club President David Pilkington is keen to change.
Christchurch needs it. You get your big games, even your Warriors games. You know, it's not just for rugby. You know, you'd have it. You'd have the Warriors there as well, I'm sure, and that would attract the crowds. It would probably attract more teams coming here. We'd probably get more games that people would go to.
The Christchurch City Council has already committed $254 million towards a new stadium. If it accepts a staff recommendation at its meeting tomorrow to spend another $220 million out of the government fund, then the city will be on track to build a $500 million covered stadium, only the second of its kind in the country.
If it's going to bring people and more money into the city and promote our city and grow our city, but maybe they should think about fixing some of these earthquake damaged houses as well with that money.
Look, I'm sure there are a lot of things and a lot of different priorities that are competing for each other, but I think a stadium will bring some good sports events, and I think people are getting fixated on it being a rugby stadium rather than multi-purpose.
I think it's really important for the city. We need to bring in the tourists, and the stadium will be part of that.
But Keep Our Assets Canterbury spokesperson Murray Horton believes the council has been forced into funding the stadium through a concerted campaign from both business groups and Canterbury Rugby.
It should not be the top priority above all else. I mean, to be given $300 million and to use $220 million of that for that one White Elephant project is sort of rather skewed priorities.
Murray Horton says the council should put some of the money towards social housing instead.
It adds insult to injury that the rugby union has made very, very plain that they will contribute not 1 cent to the cost of this stadium, whereas they will be basically not the sole beneficiary, but certainly the main beneficiary of it when it's built.
Age Concerned Canterbury Chief Executive Simon Templeton says the council also has to look at the city's rising rates, which are due to increase by 50% over the next 10 years, in part to help pay for the city's rebuild.
I know, again, for some older people, that 50% increase is going to mean huge financial hardship, and I would like to see more done to support people who are in that position so that they don't have to carry that burden.
Christchurch City Missioner Matthew Mark says the demand for social housing in Christchurch is increasing. He says investment in this should be one of the council's top priorities.
There is still a number of issues that relate back to earthquake times, where there's been perhaps repairs administered in an ad hoc way that hasn't created an opportunity for something to be warm or weather tight. We also know that need is growing because the cost of housing is increasing at a rate that exceeds affordability from most people's perspective.
The Canterbury Rugby Union would not comment publicly today, but as previously said, it would not help pay for the new stadium. If the council votes in favour of using most of the government fund for the stadium, it will have to present it with a business case before any money is handed over. The council plans to start building the stadium in 2020, with a likely opening date of 2024. For Checkpoint, called Dan Dalgetty, TNA.
It's 90 minutes past 6. There have been calls for boycotts of household staple Sistema's products as bargaining continues for better pay and conditions for its workers. This morning on Morning Report, RNZ told the story of Maria Latu, who is working 60 hours a week as a team leader on Sistema's South Auckland factory floor, earning $17 an hour. Workers like her, alongside their union E2, have been in negotiations with the company since February for better pay and conditions. Tom Furley reports.
So far, almost 5,500 people have put their name to an open letter telling Sistema's CEO, Drew Muirhead, to negotiate an agreement with decent pay and conditions for its workers. Staff who have been working there for over a decade say they're still working long 60-hour weeks and earning $17 an hour, just 50 cents more than the minimum wage. The sale of its plastic containers in places like supermarkets and department stores all over the country has led to the products becoming a staple household item in many New Zealand homes. E2 advocate Neville Donaldson says part of their campaign for better conditions has been to challenge that.
What we've been doing is holding what we call education forums outside major retailers like Warehouse, Briscoes, and advising people of the dispute with Sistema. And what we're saying to them is that the Sistema product is a very good product, but at this stage there's a dispute and they're not valuing their workers, and therefore people should withhold purchasing that product until the dispute's resolved.
After RNZ's story this morning, some people like Natasha Lucas said they were miffed.
Nobody's time is worth $17 an hour if you have family that you're looking after. And I just feel like as New Zealanders we can do better than this.
She, like lawyer and unionist Lisa Fox, plan on boycotting the products until things improve.
And we have some products at home, definitely. Probably use them every other day, but the workers in the union have called for a boycott, so we certainly won't be purchasing any more of their products.
Sistema's CEO was again unavailable for an interview today. However, the company has said the interests of its employees have always been and will remain their highest priority. It says it will continue to negotiate with the union. Since negotiations began in February, E2 says it has put forward 3 proposals for the company to consider, but each time it has been rejected as unreasonable. After a meeting last month, the union put the ball in Sistema's court, making them come back to the table with their own proposal. A mediator was also brought in. However, as of this morning, things were still up in the air. Despite the union expecting a proposal by the end of last month, it was still yet to receive it. Meanwhile, Sistema said it had a mediation meeting set down for tomorrow, but it had been told by the mediator that the union refused to show up. Now, the union advocate Neville Donaldson says they have received a settlement proposal.
Now, what we all need to do is take the opportunity to go through that proposal to consider whether it's something that is worthy of taking to members or whether we feel it needs more work and therefore we would need to take that back and discuss it further with the employer.
He couldn't provide any detail about what was in the proposal. However, he says no meetings are yet on the cards, but they're working at getting a settlement that suits everyone as quickly as possible. Mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Tom Furley tēnei.
Thanks, Tom. Just before we move on, State Highway 29 between Matamata and Tauranga, the Kaimai Ranges, of course, Kaimai Road is reopened. NZTA just announcing the road is back open. Thank you, those of you who've been texting in about it. I think some of you got stuck there for a wee while. Protesters have biffed fake 1080 pallets all over Parliament steps and scattered dead birds amid their escalating campaign to ban the poison. A large and loud protest on the weekend has continued this week with chalk drawings all over Parliament's entranceways. Here's political reporter Gia Garrick.
Officials in hazmat-style gear have had to pick up the 1080 lookalike pellets, which were strewn over the steps on Parliament's forecourt this afternoon.
It's fake 1080. We wouldn't throw 1080 around and endanger the public like our government does. So we put fake 1080 on the steps, and dead bodies that have been killed, dead birds and mice that have been killed by 1080. They were brought from the West Coast here to present to these politicians.
Alan Gurdon and his fellow protester ate some of the fake pellets to prove it. Mr Gurdon says he's lost 3 dogs to 1080 poison, and he and his family have all been poisoned, he believes, when it got into their drinking water after a government-ordered 1080 drop. He wants 1080 banned for good. The Environment Minister, David Parker, went out the front of Parliament to see what was going on.
I think people should comply with the law. We've had to have people out here in protective gear because they weren't sure whether it was fake or not.
So what about our children, sir, that live with this death all the time? They have 1080 pellets dropped into their forest, 100 metres within their houses, and you say you have to comply with the law?
Mr Parker tried to explain himself before acknowledging it was unlikely he'd have any luck doing so today.
Why is it one law for you people and one law for us?
Well,
Are we considered the pest you are trying to get rid of, sir?
Well, there is a disagreement between you and other people who have a different view of the science.
Yeah, I mean, everyone's entitled to their view, but what's wrong with hearing the truth? If what you do is so morally, ethically and legally right, what are you people scared of? Come on.
Look, I don't think I can...
Why not?
I don't think whatever I say today will satisfy your concerns.
This was happening at the same time the rest of Parliament's politicians were running the media gauntlet on their way into the House. Green Party co-leader Marama Davidson says the 1080 protesters have valid concerns.
It's not the strategy I'd use, it's not the tactics I'd use, but they're trying to be heard, and we will need to keep listening.
National Party leader Simon Bridges says protesting is important, but it needs to be done lawfully.
I think things that involve, acts of throwing, of possible violence, leaving things that have to be cleaned up, that probably oversteps the mark.
David Parker says he will be getting the poisoned animals, including a kiriru, tested to see if they did indeed die from ingesting 1080 on the west coast, as the protesters claim. Atu iti whare parimata, mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko Gia Garakaho.
6:25. Going back to Zach's story about resource consents and building that have taken place with properties that seem to have obtained consents incorrectly. I have to say that while Greyland consent was incorrect under the unitary plan, this kind of loss of sunlight and privacy will become routine, says Jeremy from Onehunga, particularly in those areas that were unable to defend their patch, as happened in Greyland. And as for the Auckland Regional Fuel Tax, our mate Richard, we're always lovely to hear from you, Richard. Really, what are the complaints about? If one drives a fuel-inefficient vehicle, the increase may approach 1 cent per kilometre. Get over it. If you are stupid enough to live 50k from the work, it will approach $1 a day extra. Complaints are petty. Ratepayers are the ones who should be complaining. Housing is taxed at least $15 per week to subsidise motorists. Roads have to be paid for by tax of some sort, and taxing motorists is the most sensible. Fair take, Richard, except for the description of people who live 50k from work as stupid. In Auckland, that's often just a matter of what you can afford on the housing front. But yeah, user pays, I guess, is the argument you are making. Thank you. Lovely to hear from you, as it always is. It's nearly 10 years since the collapse of the New York-based investment bank Lehman Brothers. The failure of the world's 4th largest investment bank is seen as triggering the global crisis, the GFC, that followed. When it filed for bankruptcy on September 15th, 2008, with its more than $600 billion in assets, global stock markets went into free fall. The spectacular failure had many questioning whether American capitalism had had its day. The BBC's Samira Hussain looks back on the impact of 10 years ago.
This is a pivotal moment for America's economy.
Panicked sell-offs on world financial markets.
No one's seen anything like this.
Massive bailout by American taxpayers.
We are facing one of the most serious financial crises in this nation's history.
But if there was a singular event that started America's financial crisis, it would be the collapse of this bank, Lehman Brothers.
That's my Lehman Brothers running jersey.
This table is full of memories for Lynn Gray. She spent 11 and a half years working at Lehman Brothers.
I was heartbroken. I would never have left Lehman. I would have stayed there until they kicked me out. Well, they did kick me out, but I would have stayed there for a very long time. It was one of the best places I had ever worked.
A decade later, many have not forgiven Lehman Brothers. Although the financial crisis was a result of several bad actors, when the bank ultimately filed for bankruptcy, it set off a chain reaction. On Monday, September 15th, when Lehman Brothers filed for bankruptcy, the Dow Jones fell 500 points, the biggest one-day drop since the terrorist attacks of 9/11. Watching it all happen was Peter Tuchman, a trader at the New York Stock Exchange. What was it like for you to be on the floor and watching that happen on the big board?
Well, it's kind of funny you asked that because I was actually standing here in this spot where we're doing this interview, and things were actually going crazy, and I threw my hands up in the air like this, and a photo was taken. There was anxiety, there was fear.
The financial markets did recover and have since broken many records. But for some, the legacy of the crisis is still personal. Can you imagine a day where you can
wear it again?
Yeah,
sure.
truly.
I might wear this on September 15th.
A former Lehman Brothers employee ending Samira Hussain's report from New York. It's worth noting Lehman Brothers bankruptcy filing remains the largest in US history. Daniel, who's a thoroughly engaged listener, has tweeted, "This Sistema boycott sounds counterproductive to me." On the bottom, Daniel's put two photos, or one photo of two things. A Sistema product, on top a cheaper alternative from the warehouse, also made in New Zealand. What are the chances workers making the latter are better paid? We'd love to hear from the warehouse. Are they paying their workers more than the Sistema workers? That's a hell of a good question, Daniel. Thank you. Nice to hear from you. Nice to have your company, everyone, on behalf of our excellent, hard-working and delightful Checkpoint team. Slightly bonkers. That is the program for this evening. We'll be back tomorrow at 5. Until then, have a great evening.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Unions are urging Labour to stand strong in the face of pushback from New Zealand First over employment law changes. Australian MPs have been warned its deportation of New Zealanders is damaging the Trans-Tasman relationship. About 50 pro-Brexit Tory MPs have reportedly met to discuss how and when to force out the British Prime Minister Theresa May. And protesters have thrown fake 1080 pellets over Parliament steps as their campaign to ban the poison continues. Our next news and weather is at 7.
It's causing heartbreak. It's breaking up families that really want to be together. And political headaches for the Minister.
This is the number one issue that migrant communities raise with me.
This week on Insight, families ask when and if a ban will be lifted on overseas parents joining their children and grandchildren as residents. Jill Bonnet examines the financial and political costs